Shavua Tov, a good vach. As you may know, this week we celebrate the beginning of the Rebbe's accepting the leadership of Lubavitch. We also mark, obviously, the yard site of his father-in-law, his predecessor, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe. And today's story, I want to tell a story about the great self-sacrifice that the previous Rebbe displayed when he was a young man. I don't think he was even 20 years old. There was a terrible decree that was hanging over the heads of the Jews in Russia, and it was pretty much in the hands of two people, the author of the decree, and the one who had to give the final approval. Neither of them were friends of the Jews. And the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe, sent his young son, his only son, to go and travel to the capital city to see what he could do to try to defeat this new decree from happening. And the previous Rebbe went and he met with many Jewish leaders and tried to use every contact available to try to stop this decree from making its progress to being signed and sealed and stamped. And there was nothing he could do. No one had enough influence to reach these ministers who were in charge of this decree. After doing everything he felt he could possibly do, he returned to Lubavitch to report, unfortunately, on the lack of success to his father. When he came to his father, the Rebbe was about to put on his talis and tefillin. The talis was on his shoulders, and he was examining the strings. You tighten them and you count them before you put on your talis. And he related to the Rebbe what had happened, and that he was totally unsuccessful. What he did, what he tried, but he was still unsuccessful. And his father responded by telling him a story of his father, the Rebbe, who was once sent on a mission, and he too was unsuccessful. But when he returned to his father to report, his father said about the power of a talis, the power of the strings of the tzitzis to accomplish many great things, and that he kissed the tzitzis and went back and was successful. So the young Rebbe understood the message. He kissed his father's tzitzis and went back to the train station, determined to figure out a way back in the capital city how to deal with this decree. He already knew it didn't work. He came to the city, started exploring, and discovered that there was one older professor who had been the mentor and the guide of this minister in whose hands lay the decision to approve or disapprove of this decree. And the Rebbe somehow managed to meet him, an old guy, in his house, and engaged in many conversations, I guess philosophy and all kinds of things. And they struck it off well, and they met once, twice, a number of days, 3, 4, 5 days they met. And eventually the professor asked the Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, why have you come here? It's so nice to speak to you, but what's going on? What are you here for? What's your real mission? And he responded that he's trying to get to his former student to convince him not to approve the decree. And the old professor said, I'm sorry to tell you that my former protege, my former student, really, we had nothing in common, we have no connection anymore, and he's really kind of off his rocker. And I don't think there's any way to have a rational discussion with him. But from the good old days, I still happen to have a pass that gives me total access, total clearance into the government minister buildings where his offices are. So if that pass will do you any good, I'm willing to lend it to you. Now, if you're caught with it, please don't mention my name, because that won't be good for either of us. But if you want to risk it, even though you don't look exactly like your average Russian minister, but you're more than welcome to it. So the Rebbe figured, you got to start somewhere. He thanked him, he took the pass, and at the appropriate opportunity, he showed up at the ministry building. And they all looked at him in shock. What's a religious Jew, a rabbi, doing here? But when he waved his pass, and it was examined closely, no one could deny that this pass gives the bearer entrance into the building. To make a long story short, the Rebbe was given access to the building. He somehow discovered which office was the minister's. He went into the room and discovered the decree is waiting on the desk in a pile, waiting to be stamped. Now, there was 2 bins on the desk, and one bin said approved, and one bin was full of papers that said not accepted, rejected. So the Rebbe looked in the drawers, he found the stamp that said rejected. He took this decree against the Jewish people and stamped each page rejected, 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 put it in the bottom of the rejected bin, and ran for his life. He calmly, outwardly disappeared from the building, returned the pass to the professor, and returned back to Lubavitch to tell his father the good news. And that's the last anyone ever heard of that decree. This kind of self-sacrifice as a young man, I don't think he was even 20 at the time, was just the beginning of a life of self-sacrifice for the good of all Jews in every place that he lived and places he never went to make sure they were given the opportunities to have the best Jewish life possible. Thank God most of us live in a situation where self-sacrifice is not necessary. What is necessary is to put ourselves on the side once in a while to do what we know is the right thing. May we have the strength and the brains to keep doing that. Have a great week.